So I asked Pastor Harriet to maybe shoot me off a few questions that you may have. So I'm going to attempt to answer some of the questions, and hopefully there'll be enough time in the end for a little Q&A if that's in the program. So I'll just get right to it. So the question that was asked was, number one, they would like to know how living your faith, your religion of Islam, brings you joy. How does it cultivate a love for you and your family? So I thought about that, and the sentiment of joy wasn't the one that came to mind. It was more of contentment, hope, and peace were the sentiments that arose when I thought about the impact of my faith in our life. We're taught in our religion that this life here on earth is a test, and that there are 5 distinct life stages for a human soul, and that is, number 1 was the gathering of all souls. So the entirety of humanity, at a time before time, gathered before our Creator, and God asked us, "Am I not your Lord?" And we all affirmed our souls, "Yes, you are our Lord." So that was the first life stage. Second life stage is life in the womb of our mothers. The third life stage is life here on earth, which is a test of how we treat each other, how we treat the earth, all of those things, to determine where we'll end up in our, the fourth life rather is the time in our grave, and then the fifth life is the afterlife, whether it's heaven or hell, okay? So this life is a struggle, admittedly, where we struggle with our ego, with our temptations, and we endeavor to do good, and as such, hopefully, all of us will enter into heaven together. There are, just incidentally, there are 3 things in this life that we can leave behind that is of benefit to us in the afterlife. One is pious children, the second is beneficial knowledge, and third is beneficial endowment. So if we were to leave any of those 3 things here on earth behind us, then we would benefit from them in the afterlife. And the family, the question about family, it is a central, Islam believes family as a central building block of a just and civil society. So there's a lot of literature and teachings around the importance of family and its interrelationships, the rights that children have over their parents. For example, children have a right to an education, right to just basic necessities in life, and it's an affirmative obligation upon the parents to provide it. The wife has certain rights too. Like, for example, if a wife chooses to be a stay-at-home mom, the father is actually obligated to pay her a salary because it's considered a very, very challenging job. So we have that arrangement where I have to pay my wife. Money. I think she wants a raise, but okay. Second question. They would like to know more about how you personally experience your relationship with Allah, which means God. So like a Christian Arab, in their Christian Bible, it says Allah, which is simply an Arabic term for God. Okay. They would like to know more about how you personally experience your relationship with Allah, God. So 5 daily prayers is one of them. When you have to pray 5 times a day, it's not just the mechanics of praying, but there's a spiritual element too. Because for one, there are many, many levels, and there's books and books written upon all of these things that I'm going to touch upon. But one is, when you go in front of God 5 times a day, in between, you're less likely to do something bad because you know that, hey, about an hour I got to go in front of God, so I better, not smoke that cigarette or whatever, right? So that there's those practical things. In our religion, we accept the good and the bad of the world, that it is all part of the divine mandate. So, and that's a real struggle these days, right? Because we see so much going on in the world. So one of our scholars recently said, if for a moment you had divine wisdom, you wouldn't change a thing. So it's the humble acceptance, right? That God is in charge, the good and the bad, and that we have to humble ourselves to that cosmic reality, if you will. Another aspect is that God looks upon our souls, not our physical being. So we're taught that and this concept of equality comes into mind too, because I struggled with that, because when I was in college, in my research, I said it's impossible, the notion of equality among men/women, because we're all so different in height and stature and intelligence and whatever. But it only makes sense that within the construct of a creator, because in our religion we're taught that God looks upon our souls, not our physical being. So our souls, our intent, how good of a person we are, that's what we're judged by, not our physical or our intellectual abilities or our physical stature. Okay, so that's kind of touches upon the answer of how we experience God on a daily basis. One person asked, how do you as Muslims feel, think about, perceive others with different beliefs? Okay, so in the Quran, there's 25 prophets that are named, similar as in the Old Testament and New Testament. I think 23 of the 25 prophets named are the same as the ones named in the Old and the New Testament. There's 2 additional ones that are not the same. But we're also taught that there were 124,000 prophets that were sent to humanity. All people, no community on earth is left without guidance. So as a result of that, we as Muslims look around and we see like some of the Native American traditions or Buddhist traditions, and we see remnants that are very similar. So we can't say that they're misguided because we just don't know. God sent 124,000. He said he did not leave a community abandoned. So we can't prejudge and say that community is misguided or whatever. We just simply don't know is the answer. So that's how we view other traditions, if you will. Now, Christianity and Judaism has a special place. They're called people of the book because this is a little bit technical, but there's a distinction here. Prophets receive revelation and they pass on that message to their people. Messengers receive revelation, and it also includes scripture and consequent legal systems. So, for example, the 5 messengers that have a special rank in Islam is Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. So they left. So they left a legal system and a teaching system as part of their message. So they're messengers. So all messengers are prophets and messengers, but not all prophets are messengers, if that makes sense. So these 5 important people, prophets and messengers, they came with a legal system. So we hold a special status for people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. Like John the Baptist, Okay, do you pray 5 times a day? Yes. Some don't, but we do. Next question. Do you and your family desire to fulfill the 5 pillars, and what does that look like to you? So in the previous reading, it talked about Islam, which is submission. Islam means submission. And they're the physical acts of worship, praying 5 times a day, paying alms tax, going on pilgrimage, declaring the testament of faith. Those are physical acts. But then Angel Gabriel, he also taught our prophet about iman, faith, right? Faith in his angels, God, the books, the messengers in the last day. The third thing he taught was ihsan, which is excellence, spiritual excellence. So they're not isolated, they're interrelated, right? So when the question is asked about the 5 the 5 pillars, we also have behind the physical act itself some spiritual meaning. And there again, each of these acts have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of scholarly books about what it means, the spiritual aspect of each and every one of them. I'll just give you a touch of them, flavor of them. So in prayer, as I mentioned, you pray 5 times a day, but there's practical benefits of doing so, right? Like I said, just being aware, being God conscious. It requires you to be constantly God conscious because you got to go in front of your Lord 5 times a day, right? Paying zakat, the alms tax, which is just making donations to the poor. And there's a methodology, like the receiver doesn't know the person who gives. That's a criteria. So like I would give to you, and you would know who to give it to in the community that needs it. I would not know the person who received it, neither would they know us. It speaks of the dignity that we have to preserve in our society. Shahada, the declaration of faith, that there's only one God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. In so stating, it's an absolute negation that there is only one God, no other, right? And when you say Muhammad is a messenger of God, by necessity, you are affirming the prophethood and messengerhood of all the 124,000 that came before him as well. Ramadan, which is fasting. So when you fast, you're beating up on your ego, right? Because you have to fast with not only your appetite nature, desire for intimacy and food. You abstain from those things. But you also have to abstain from saying bad words, thinking evil of people. So it's a completely a whole event where you are literally beating up on your ego, right? So it's a really humbling experience in that regard. The Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, which was the first house of worship built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. And it's a reenactment of Abraham, if you're following in his footsteps, as well as his wife Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. So, for example, when we reenact running from one mountaintop to the other 7 times, we're retracing the footsteps of Hagar, wife of Abraham, who was searching for water for her son who was in the desert. And God created water right there in the middle of the desert called Zamzam, and you can still drink it today. And it's interesting because scientifically, this aquifer underneath the desert, it never dips below its level, no matter how much water is pumped out of it. Now during Ramadan, literally 4 to 5 million people will go there and just gulp this Zamzam water, and that aquifer stays exactly the same level. It's kind of it's a bit of a mystery, but. Okay, so that gives you some of the answers on the 5 pillars. Number 6, did you grow up with Islam? No, I converted 22 years ago. 7, what is it like to be a Muslim? So this is an interesting question. I'll try to explain it this way. Sharia is an ethical framework, okay? And incidentally, there's concerns about is Sharia taking over France or whatever. In Sharia, it says that you must obey the laws of the land in which you find yourself. So Sharia itself prevents Sharia from taking over any, So anyways, there's reality and then there's what you hear on the news. So what Sharia does is it effectively protects 5 essential things. One is it protects religion, all religion. In the Quran, there's a statement that says that Muslims must protect all houses of worship, and it specifically says churches, synagogues, mosques, and I think one other I can't remember. So it's an affirmative obligation for us to protect all religions. So Sharia has all kinds of laws and codes and whatever talking about protection of religion. Second is it protects life. So there's a famous saying in the Quran where it says, if you save one life, it is as if you saved all of humanity. And if you take one life unjustly, it is as if you've taken all of humanity unjustly. So that's how serious the sanctity of life. The third is protection of intellect. So for that reason, Islam prohibits alcohol and drugs because it alters your intellect. So that's the reason why it prohibits those types of things. Fourth is protection of family. So one aspect of Sharia talks about the right for an individual to know his or her lineage. So for example, extramarital affairs are prohibited because you can have children growing up not knowing who their parents are. Slavery in the common context is prohibited because slavery cuts off their lineage. So when they say slavery in Islam, it's not the same as slavery as you and I know it. Slavery in Islam, when it's talked about, is more of kind of like domestic workers, but their family, lineage is protected and they know who their parents are. It's like a domestic worker, as I said. So when I say Sharia prohibits slavery, I'm talking about the ones that you and I think about, which is taking people from one land to another and cutting off their lineage. That is prohibited. Okay, finally, it protects wealth or property. So, for example, Islam prohibits usury, interest, because it's a stealing of wealth from another human being unjustly. So that's kind of gives you a taste of what it is to be a Muslim today. Hopefully, I answered some of your questions. Yeah, sure. Any questions?
I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey to Islam.
Sure.
How you were raised in terms of your spiritual life and how you encountered Islam and what drew you to it.
Sure. So, I grew up in San Jose, just a regular kid. I mean, if I had to check a box on an application, I guess I would have put Christian, but I didn't really know too much about Christianity, But it was a journey, and I remember when I was a freshman at Annapolis, we were given an assignment, and the assignment was to summarize the biographies of all the most eminent philosophers and scientists of the Western civilization. And so here I was in the library flipping through the books, and I came across a passage that it just jarred me, which said something to the effect of how all of these scientists, René Descartes, Isaac Newton, Spinoza, all of them, right, Galileo, they were all believers in the transcendental. And I go, what the heck is a transcendental? I looked that up. It meant God. It's an academic neutral term for God. So I thought, wow, why didn't anybody tell us that? That when Isaac Newton was trying to understand the origin of motion, he was really trying to understand the moment of creation, And when René Descartes mapped out the Cartesian coordinates, he was trying to understand the geometric relationship of the created universe. Nobody had told me that in public school, that connection. So I thought it was fascinating. I thought these people are really smart. If they believed in a God, maybe I ought to look into it. So I looked into it, and I walked away with a pocket full of questions and standards. And as I traveled around the world while in the Navy, I did my best to understand the religions of the lands in which I was visiting. And none of them really did it for me. None of them really answered my questions. And Islam was one that I didn't want to be a part of because they're crazy terrorist Arabs, right? Because I was subject to the media like any other person in the West, and I thought they were just wacko people. I didn't want to be a part of that. But when I ran out of religions, I thought, well, maybe I ought to look into it. So I looked into it, and it literally answered all my questions with ease, every last one. So it was a crossroads where I said, well, do I believe in this or not? So I accepted Islam, and one example, one standard, for example, was, if we're talking about God, the created universe, a standard that I held fast was one where scientific discovery should not be able to debunk revelation. The revelation must necessarily be ahead of scientific discovery, right? So I found that to be true in Islam. Like in the Quran, it talks about, I was a navigator in the Navy, and we give you one example. It's still a mystery to us how certain bodies of water doesn't mix. Like in the Strait of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean water flows out to the Atlantic, there's a pressure and salinity gradient that remains for many, many nautical miles before it mixes. It's a mystery. It causes weather disturbances and whatever. And the Quran talks about that 1,400 years ago by illiterate desert prophet who's never seen the ocean. And it talks about how the waves could get so powerful that you could have waves inside of waves. And let me tell you, unless you've been in the high seas to see that, you would have no idea what the meaning of that is. But he talks about that in the Quran by a desert Bedouin who's never seen it. So there are hundreds of examples of those scientific proofs, and there's other standards that I had that Islam answered to my satisfaction, and so I became a Muslim. Any questions? Sure.
Is it hard for you to be in the Navy being a Muslim?
No. I mean, that's a complicated question. I can tell you that my colleagues were supportive, for one. I mean, Americans are good people. And Americans are we live in a very polarized environment today when we watch CNN or Fox News. It's the extreme right and extreme left that's presented to us. But the reality is, most of us sit in a confused middle. We're kind of right on some things, left on some things, and we generally assume the best in each other, right? So I found that most of my colleagues, all of them really, were very supportive of it, more curious than anything else. As far as our policies are concerned, I mean, I believe that our country does its best. We try to do our best in all circumstances. Sometimes we fail, and we have, like Vietnam. There's Iraq. I mean, there's times when we fall short of the mark. But I believe that our country does try to do its best. So there's no conflict. And under Sharia, actually, we're obligated to defend the land that we're a part of. So there's no conflict about me being in the Navy or having been in the Navy and being a Muslim in that respect. Yeah. Yes?
So what is our responsibility to help alleviate that, the stereotype that you even spoke of?
Yeah.
It seems like waiting for Muslims to prove that they're not those people seems like different people should take responsibility and speak that truth as well, and not just wait for a Muslim to come and prove that they're not
Right.
those people. Just because there's, billions of people.
Yeah. Islamophobia you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys for sitting there listening to me, for one, right? Really appreciate that, and that's the start. But the other is, it takes, it's just, we have to think, because it takes a casual moment of logic to recognize that 1.4 billion people on Earth cannot be crazy. Because if they were, there would be no civilization, there would be no Earth. So one out of 4 human beings is a nutcase. Doesn't make sense, right? So, and so, it used to be that when I was on an airplane 20 years ago, everybody would have a book in their face. Now, we have our devices, which is really a black hole, I think, because it's an echo chamber that simply reinforces, what we want to believe, And so we're not ever challenged, unfortunately, or we're not less so. So I think one thing we can do is encourage ourselves and our community to read books, get your face out of the device, and push yourself, get a little uncomfortable, and study a subject that we may not know of. So I think that's what we can do. And ultimately, I don't concern myself too much about it because this is, God's religion, and this is all part of God's plan, whatever it is. So that's what I mean by what the effect that I have is contentment, knowing that I can only do what I can do and let the chips fall where they may, So, yes, ma'am.
Do you encounter surprise that, we have an idea in our mind, and I understand that there are Muslims of every ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
We have ideas in our mind that tend to be Middle Eastern, or perhaps they're African American.
Mm-hmm.
And do you get people who are surprised?
Yeah, I don't really get out much, but yeah, when I do. There's a misprint. I got 7 kids at home, not 6. So, I'm busy doing that. But yeah, you're right. The most populous Muslims are Asians. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, and you could take the entirety of the Arab world, and it would be less than the Muslims in Indonesia. It's just that, we have a hyper focus on that part of the world right now for geopolitical reasons. The Israel-Palestine conflict being, a centerpiece of it all. So there's just, on a relative basis, undue amount of attention in all things Middle East. Like if the Middle East exported sand, we wouldn't care about it. But they have oil, so we care about it, So we have to kind of have our frame of reference shifted and say, okay, but within the global context in numerics, the most Muslims in the world are Asians, South Asian and Indonesia, right? And then followed by Africa, then China, then, Arabs are the smallest, I think, ethnic group that are Muslims, or one of the smallest. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
On a personal level, how would you feel or react or respond to if one of your children chose not to be Islam?
It'd be disappointing, but he or she must choose their own path. And we're taught that religion is not compulsory. You can't force anybody to believe in anything. That's why there's no proselytizing in Islam.
So, because I happen to know a young man who was raised Islamic and in Islam and has tried to tell his parents that he doesn't believe, and they did not respond that way.
Yeah, it's very tough. It is tough because some of it, we get mixed up with cultural stuff, and there's most of what you see in out there is not Islam. It's cultural stuff. They get confused. Like they go, well, no, this is Islam. It's like, no, it's not. The fact that you eat biryani is not Islam. That's cultural stuff, So, we're taught that the Quran says that the religion is not compulsory. You can't force anybody to believe anything. Ultimately, they have to find their own path. We encourage our children. We do our best to teach them what we believe is to be the right path. But if they don't choose it, they don't choose it. What are you going to do, The other thing that we're taught is that God determines who's successful and who's not. You can call yourself Muslim, Jew, whatever you want to call yourself. But we don't know the fate of another soul. Only God does. So how do I know that individual who's rejected Islam but will go on? So, he might end up at the highest level of heaven, as far as I know. And God says that. Says this is his domain, not our domain. We don't know the fate of another soul, no matter what they call themselves. So... Now, you're not going to hear this type of thing from these kind of like serious, I'm not a scholar, so I don't know and we're prohibited from answering questions that we don't know the answers to. But those two things I know for sure because it says in the Quran. I read it about 15 times. Yes, sir.
You commented that there's no proselytizing in Islam, but obviously, if you look on the web, there's sites that are proselytizing, trying to convert people. And when you talk about that, you talk about the smaller groups like ISIS that want to bring about the end of the world faster than God has planned it himself. How do you have discussions within your own community about those issues?
Yeah.
How do you, I know there's also groups out there that are trying to teach the restless young man the more peaceful side of Islam on the web. So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, in the community that you attend, besides just going to mosque alone, I assume you have other community activities.
Yeah.
What are the discussions that you're having around the issue? You brought up the fact that we have some responsibility to let people know that it's not all crazy, but what are the responsibilities that the community is taking to
Yeah.
prevent people from becoming,
Radicalized.
the word is called Islamicized and whatever,
Yeah.
on the radical side.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real tough question. First of all, on ISIS, we view ISIS as an aberration, okay? ISIS is to Islam as KKK is to Christianity. Okay, you look at what the basis of Christianity. I read Mein Kampf, by the way, and Mein Kampf talks about Christianity as justification for fascism. All right, and so we look at ISIS in the same vein, the broader ummah, the broader Muslim community, and there's many scholarly works that refutes ISIS on theological grounds, on political grounds, on any other grounds you could think of. By Mohammed Yaqoubi, it's called Refuting ISIS. Unfortunately, it doesn't get that much airtime, the broader Muslim community's condemnation for ISIS, because it doesn't sell airtime, But you can rest assured that there's, broad-based condemnation for ISIS and all that they stand for. They're thugs. It's the bottom line. That's what they are. And it's a territorial conquest, and it's a more of a geopolitical phenomenon than it is a religious thing.
How's your oldest child?
22.
So you discuss those kinds of things with your older children about those issues?
They teach me about these things. Yeah, they're more aware. I mean, they're all traveled, and they're very aware of these things, and they tend to be my teachers on these matters. And then on the issue of proselytizing, so in Islam, if people have questions, we are required to be a source of presenting Islam in its true, most beautiful light. So that's why these people are making attempts to be available, if you will. Some may be doing it more assertively than others. But proselytizing as a rule is prohibited because of the injunction that religion is not compulsory. You can't force people to believe in things. But there may be outreach, of course, just to reach out and get. And there's a scholar here called Hamza Yusuf at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, who said recently that really there's amnesty for people in the West because Islam is not presented in its true light, in its most beautiful form. Therefore, what are we to expect, when people are hostile towards Islam, right? So he believed that there's just blanket amnesty for people in the West because there's so much misinformation about Islam and even from Muslims themselves a lot of times. What you're referring to, these websites. I haven't been on them. I don't bother myself with it, but I believe you when I say that there's some, crazy narratives out there. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Could you speak a little bit about the role of women,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you presented because there's a lot of misinformation about the role of women too. There's an entire chapter devoted to Virgin Mary in the Quran. And the language of that chapter in Arabic is such that it is crystal clear that God perceives Virgin Mary as the best of creation. The best of creation, even among all men. And the honorific is evidenced by the fact that Jesus is referred to Jesus, son of Mary. And now in the Arabic language, Jesus is subordinated to the honorific of Mary herself. Okay, women, the Prophet Muhammad basically was the first what do you call it, women's rights activists. Because if you study the Arab community of the time and how women were treated pre-arrival of Prophet Muhammad and post, it's night and day. The role of women and the importance of it. There's a famous saying that the path to heaven lies at the feet of your mother. And the way that's illustrated is the Prophet Muhammad was asked by a stranger who came and said, I'm pulled by my dad's needs, by my mom's needs, and by my cousin's needs. Whose needs do I attend to first? And the Prophet Muhammad said, your mother. He goes, okay, got it, my mother first. Then who? The Prophet said, your mother. And he said, okay, I got it, my mom. Then who? Your mother. And he's like, is this man crazy? Like, what? Then who? Your father. So the reverence and the respect that we have to pay our mothers is non-negotiable. And so, yeah, there's a lot, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about that. And the whole thing about the hijab, it's modesty is what it is. Have you ever seen an image of Virgin Mary without a headscarf? During the 1800s and prior to U.S. American society, most women had hats and had it's modesty is what it is. It's not some sort of, I don't know what, but that's what it is. And men are required to have, there's code of dress for men too. We have to cover ourselves minimally from our belly to our knees. And so there's similar standards for men and women. It's just, in the modern context, it's become foreign because we're all half naked running around and, so, yeah. Hopefully that answered your question. By the way, if you guys have other questions, pass it on to me and I'll get somebody who's more qualified to answer them and send it back to you guys. Any other questions? Maybe more time for one more? No?
Does your wife wear head covering?
She does, yeah. She didn't for the longest time, but she decided she was going to, and she does now. And men, we stay out of it because it's kind of none of our business. It is. It's totally a personal choice. And it's just none of our business. If one wants to do it, they can do it. If they don't, then they don't. Thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you very much.